And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is September the 11th, 254th day of the year. Just 111 days remain of the year's over with. And it's quite an interesting date. There's a number of important news stories to keep in mind. Number one, 24 years ago was when the World Trade Center was attacked. According to history by Osama bin Laden's people, though I had an FBI agent tell me that there wasn't enough evidence of his involvement to even bring him to trial had he been caught. And then, of course, we have the ongoing investigation into the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which took place yesterday. Now, September the 11th is not a federal holiday in the U.S., but it is observed as Patriot Day and the National Day of Service and Remembrance. Commemorates the victims and heroes of the 2001 terrorist attack. Encourages citizens to participate in community service and observe a moment of silence, display the American flag at half-staff. The holidays and observances: National Sup Day, National Hot Cross Bun Day, Are You Okay Day, extending genuine care and ensuring well-being and fostering connections through the thoughtful moments of empathy and support. National Make Your Bed Day, National School Picture Day, Patriot Day, as I said, honoring those who died in the September 11th terrorist attacks. Libraries Remember Day, No News is Good News Day. Take a break from the constant deluge of news and appreciate your own little world on No News is Good News Day. September 11th, National Day of Service, Crayfish Party, Chef Appreciation Week, Fiesta de Vinho, which is the wine festival celebrating Madero wines. Definitely take your mind off your issues if you have enough of that. Red Valley, National Child Protection Week, National Waffle Week, Toronto Film Festival, Toronto International Film Festival. It truly captures the spirit of cinema. Celebrated annually, draws a global audience of filmmakers and actors and fans. It's a place where emerging talents can shine alongside established stars. A lot of our so-called established stars, though, are showing their anti-American feelings, especially today of all days. Fiesta de San Pacho. It is a festival that you'll find in Quibdó. And it has the city becomes a stage where people showcase their rich heritage through parades and performances. A lot of bright costumes and singing and dancing and carrying on. Know Your Numbers Week, referring to blood pressure. National Assisted Living Week, Monks Across America. Famous people born on this date: Andy Ruiz Jr., Taraji P. Henson, Ludacris. Well, on that note, we're going to turn to the stories in the news, and there's some big ones right now. There's the manhunt is still ongoing for the shooter of Charlie Kirk. He was the founder of Turning Point USA, 31 years old. He was speaking at a college campus when he was shot. They immediately grabbed an individual. Turned out he was not the killer. Then they got a second one, and he wasn't the killer either. The fascinating thing is that the shot came from about 200 yards away, which would say to me we're probably dealing with a trained sniper, or at least somebody who had some training as a sniper. Having trained a few in the military and taken some of the training myself, I can assure you that a shot like that is not an easy one to make. All right, we've got apparently some internet problems this morning, along with everything else. All right. Everything is going crazy here. Well, authorities have said that 2 suspects have been investigated and cleared. They have a all hands on deck approach to finding the individual. He was speaking at University of Utah, if I'm not mistaken, and he let's see. I'll try it one more time. Well, with the internet here down, and I do have my backup internet, and it's not working either. If I was of conspiracy minded, I would think there was something strange about that. Well, President Trump has vowed accountability after the heinous act of assassinating Charlie Kirk. As you might guess, immediately after the shot, there was absolute chaos at the university, which, of course, it was an assist to whoever did it to escape. There was a GOP prayer demand in Congress, in the House. There was a silent tribute for Kirk. And there's a lot of feedback, I guess you could say. MSNBC has dropped Matthew Dowd, who sparked outrage over some comments he made about Charlie Kirk. The congressman has said that the system ought to be blinking red about the threat of terror attacks. And that's what this, of course, is being put down to domestic terrorism. Well, the battle about what bathroom people go to is still going. Supreme Court Wednesday declined to take up an application from South Carolina seeking to enforce its ban on students using public school bathrooms that match their gender identity. This was a brief unsigned order and represents a small setback for the state in its bid to tighten policies related to transgender people. But a lawsuit on that matter is still proceeding in the lower courts. The Republican-appointed justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch would have granted South Carolina's request. federal appeals court is temporarily enjoined the state from enforcing the law while the case plays out. So while people are being murdered in the streets, we're fighting about who goes to what bathroom. It makes a whole lot of sense to me. Well, going back to the World Trade Center attacks 24 years ago today, there were 4 planes. 2 hit the World Trade Center towers. 1 hit the Pentagon, though I've had people who were assigned there at the time tell me that there was no evidence of a plane ramming into the building. And 1 crashed in a field, supposedly brought down by the passengers rising up against the hijackers. I've also come up with information that there was actually a 5th plane that was supposed to be part of the attack. It didn't get off the ground. Tom Homan is blasting J.D. Pritzker, the Illinois governor. ICE is cracking down on gang members and predators, and the Democratic governor is trying to protect them. Well, the Charlotte stabbing suspect who killed the Irina Karutska, according to what I saw yesterday, has been released by a magistrate who doesn't even have a law degree. Now, granted, in my time, I've seen supposedly trained lawyers who are dumb as bricks, but at least they have some understanding of what the law is supposed to be. Laura Ingraham did a segment on Charlie Kirk. He had to drive to fight for what he believed in. And progressive cities are facing billions of dollars in economic losses. Retail crime has surged 93% since 2019. And yet, every effort President Trump is making to reduce crime is being fought tooth and nail. Apparently, in the eyes of the Democrats, the criminals are entitled to their Birkin bags and whatever they can steal. They've had such poor upbringing. We need to be understanding. You know, America's great cities once stood as beacons of prosperity and culture and commerce. But today, a lot of them, especially those run by progressives who have a soft-on-crime attitude, are paying a staggering financial price for policies that put criminals ahead of communities. It's not just about feeling unsafe when you walk to dinner or go shop downtown, but in poorly-led cities, the crime is just overwhelming everything. According to the National Retail Federation, U.S. retailers lost $112 billion in 2022 alone due to theft. That's up from $94 billion the year before. In fact, in a recent study done by the National Retail Federation, retailers reported a 93% increase in the average number of shoplifting incidents per year in 2023 versus 2019, and a 90% increase in dollar loss due to shoplifting over that same period of time. The French police have arrested hundreds as a block everything protest has erupted across the country. The government Interior Ministry announced 295 arrests in the first hours of what was a planned day of nationwide demonstrations against President Macron, budget cuts, and other complaints. France's government suffered a major setback Monday when Prime Minister Francois Bayrou lost a parliamentary confidence vote, forced his resignation. He was replaced by Sébastien Lecornu. The groups of protesters repeatedly tried to block Paris's beltway during the morning rush hour were dispersed by police using tear gas. Elsewhere in the capital, protesters piled up trash cans and threw objects at police officers. Firefighters are called to the downtown Châtelet neighborhood after a fire broke out in a restaurant, which threatened to spread to adjacent buildings. What the students who are leading the demonstrations are saying is the right is trying to make working people, students, retirees, and people in difficulty bear all the effort instead of taxing the wealth. That's the big mantra of the left: tax the wealthy. Well, unfortunately, thanks to the policies of the left, there's not a whole lot of wealth out there. Well, a Pritzker critic in Congress has introduced a bill to crack down on sanctuary states, say they're gambling with America. Illinois Republican Representative Mary Miller, a critic of Democratic Governor J.D. Pritzker, introducing a bill to crack down on sanctuary states gambling with American lives by allowing illegal immigrants to obtain commercial driver's license. In a statement sent to Fox News, Miller's office said the bill, titled the Safe Driving Laws Act, will address the 19 sanctuary states, creating an extreme level of risk for all those on the road by allowing illegals to obtain both individual driver's license and commercial driver's license. We had to go to a local DMV, and the person in front of me admitted he was here illegally, but said he had a right to have a driver's license. Well, in Texas, that's not necessarily the case. If that bill is passed, it withhold funds from the National Highway Performance and Surface Transportation Block Grant Program from states to give illegal immigrants driver's license or fail to share information about criminal aliens with the federal government. You know, there's a large segment of the left that believes undocumented immigrants have more rights than natural-born American citizens. Well, Meghan Markle expected to live a Disney princess fantasy, but when she got faced with the royal rules and protocols, which are stringent, by the way, she actually rebelled, and that's led to a lot of the problems that her husband, Prince Harry, has faced. She actually underestimated the royal duties, and because she was a star in American cinema, she expected to be treated maybe half a step below the Queen. Well, Pam Bondi says the death penalty is a possibility for Irina Zarutska's killer. President Trump has called for swift action, and the Justice Department is certainly looking into it. She said they arrested him. They're charging him federally because it was a murder on mass transit. The young woman died a horrific death. It was actually captured on video. And he said he had never spoken to her, didn't know her, and thought he was being mentally controlled by the CIA. We'll see how that defense works out. Zaruska was a 23-year-old refugee from Ukraine, was stabbed to death while riding a light rail train in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the stabbing, as I said, was captured on video. Took place about 10:30 p.m. as she was on her way home from work at a pizza restaurant, still wearing her uniform. Sat down in front of a man later identified as Brown, wearing a red hoodie. After a few minutes, he pulled out a knife and stabbed her. Well, court records obtained by Fox News shows Brown has a history of arrests dating back to 2011, including charges of felony larceny, robbery with a dangerous weapon, and communicating threats. Of course, most of those charges were later dropped. President Trump blamed the Democratic leaders in major American cities for adopting a catch-and-release policy for thugs and killers. And he's trying to put a stop to that. Well, Texas A&M regents are demanding an audit of all courses after a transgender lesson controversy erupted. The board's called for immediate and decisive steps to ensure that what happened this week will not be repeated. Well, our education system has pretty much gone into the toilet compared to what it was 50 years ago. Well, let's see what else we got. Cracker Barrel has changed again. It's not going to do its modern update. And they're going back to making biscuits by hand instead of bringing them in by the truckload. You know, I went to the very first Cracker Barrel in Lebanon, Tennessee. And it was operating out of a closed gas station. And it was quite a enjoyable experience. Well, MSNBC's Chris Hayes has corrected a false claim that a Gaza boy was killed by IDF forces. Turns out, I don't think he's dead. MSNBC's had to issue a correction after the network aired that false claim. Doing a humanitarian aid distribution operation, according to MSNBC, the IDF killed this young boy. They amplified claims from former Gaza Humanitarian Foundation contractor Anthony Aguilar, a 25-year Army veteran and retired Green Beret lieutenant colonel, who said on the air that he saw a boy he called Amir gunned down by IDF forces outside of a distribution center. Child has since been found alive, and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has urged that MSNBC issue an update. So Chris Hayes told viewers he had good news to share, but he didn't mention Aguilar's earlier MSNBC interview. Well, President Trump has sounded an alarm after Poland had an issue with what they said were Russian drones. Prince Harry's reunited with King Charles in London during an ongoing family estrangement. He went to England by himself and apparently had some time with his father. Well, DEI is the modern Democratic patronage scam. You know, back in the old days, big city Democratic politicians would sit in smoky back rooms and hand out patronage jobs to their supporters. And the ward leader's nephew would get a cushy no-so appointment to the water commission or something like that. And the wheels of politics would be greased. Well, a lot of that blatant corruption has been weeded out, but the modern Democrats have found a new, more subtle and much more lucrative way to pay off their allies. It's called diversity, equity, and inclusion. During the Biden administration, the Department of Education alone spent $1 billion on DEI. And that's just one federal agency. In almost every blue city and suburban America, local and statewide efforts pour even more money into the diversity programs. Well, anybody ever sat through a corporate training session on DEI knows what the taxpayers are getting in return for this fortune being funneled into these programs. Absolutely nothing. Millions are being handed out by Democrats just for putting together a few PowerPoint presentations about privilege theory and modes of whiteness and transvisibility. It'd make Boss Tweed water at the mouth, all that money floating around. Well, the Charlotte train stabbing has sparked a fiery debate on CNN over crime and justice. Because even the mayor is saying that the killer had a mental issue. He should be treated with deference and his problems being taken into account. We did away with locking folks up who had severe mental issues, violated their civil rights, don't you know? And I know an individual has a problem with her son who keeps saying the voices are telling him to kill her. But of course, nothing is done because the voices have the right to due process. Well, on that note, we're going to go to our topic today. We're still talking about the police and their involvement with paranormal situations during their shifts. There's been a lot of stories about police running into shadow people and hearing strange things in old buildings. I remember years ago in South America, we had to put soldiers to help the local police because there was a shortage. And the buildings were very old. And a lot of them were isolated out in the jungle. And I got back some stories that would curl your hair. Well, let's talk about the Stockbridge bypass ghost. It's one of the most famous interactions the police have ever had with the supernatural. Came from the industrial town of Stockbridge. One of the few incidents ever officially investigated by the police, and today remains formally considered an unsolved case. Now, it all happened in the late 1980s, and it was decided that to stop the heavy amount of traffic passing straight through the town of Stockbridge, they'd build a bypass around the town. As soon as construction began, a series of strange stories immediately started to follow in its wake. A jogger and his son saw a mysterious headless figure run across the street in front of them. Husband and a wife driving near the bypass construction saw a figure running across a field. The only problem was his feet weren't touching the ground. And these and more stories were reported in the run-up to the most famous incident, where the police came face to face with whatever it was that still haunts that area to this day. The penultimate event, I guess you could say, happened one evening on September 8th, 1987. Two security guards hired to patrol the construction site of the bypass were out on their rounds. Now, both of these were experienced security guards who had been working the job for a number of years and never been particularly flustered by anything they had dealt with during that time. They'd worked together before as well, and each knowing the other man relatively well. That night, they saw something to change their perspective about that area. During the end of their patrol, they spotted something strange. They saw a group of children playing underneath one of the electricity pylons near the construction site. It was after midnight. It was a cold, damp night, and no parent let their child out, yet there were a whole group of them playing like it was the most normal thing in the world. Children also nowhere near any of the houses of the town, which were over a mile away, and they also seemed to be in costumes or clothing from a time period long ago. Puzzled, the two guards watched the children play for a little while before deciding the area they were in was too dangerous and they should be moved from there and sent home. So the guards got out of their car and walked down to where the children were, briefly losing sight of them due to the piles of dirt from the construction. But when they reached the area where they'd seen the children, there was nobody there. And not only that, there was no evidence that the children had ever been there. No footprints, no trampled grass, no sounds of them further away. Well, despite losing sight of them for a moment, the area around the pylon was a flat field that didn't have any cover. And even if the children had scattered and run away, the guards would have easily been able to spot them. Well, spooked, they went back to their car and didn't think too much about it until the next day when they talked to some of the builders who lived near the site. They informed the guards they'd heard children laughing and playing in the dead of night, and They'd also seen him underneath the pylon as well. Well, around the same time the next night, with the same guards out on patrol, driving from the town to under the construction bypass where they thought they saw somebody at the construction site, thinking it was maybe a copper thief trying to take the wiring from the street lamps, they headed down to confront him. But when they got there, they saw what appeared to be a man dressed in a monk's clothing standing near one of the walls. Feeling the same type of shivers they had felt the night before, they drove up to him and turned their high beams on, hoping to confirm what they were seeing. But when they did, they said the light seemed to go right through him. He didn't cast a shadow, and then he vanished right in front of them. Well, panicked and terrified, they drove back to headquarters and called their boss, Peter Owens, who came down to the site. He got there about 4 a.m. and described entering the room to find 2 large, tough men that he had known for years, shaking and pale. One of them was actually weeping openly. They told Owens of what they had seen that night and the night before and asked him to help them. Not knowing what else to do, he put in a call to the local police station, which was answered by Chief Ellis himself, who laughed and suggested it wasn't really a police matter and maybe he ought to call a priest instead. Well, little did Chief Ellis know his words would come back to bite him the next day when he got a call from the local parish priest asking him that the police come down and remove the 2 large, terrified security guards who were there. They had turned up early that morning, practically battering down the door, and refused to leave. In addition, they were actually demanding the priest perform an exorcism on the construction site. They were convinced the place was evil and haunted. Well, faced with this, the police chief decided to look into the problem, see if he couldn't get at the bottom of what was going on. And later that same night, he and Special Constable John Beat drove up to the construction site to investigate. Now, both of them were highly skeptical, but curious enough to see what was going on that they took the time out of their night to go check it out. They pulled up in roughly the same area the guards reported seeing the figure the previous night and began to chat about what they knew so far. To their way of thinking, it was an amusing case of the guards letting their imagination run away with them. Now, Stockbridge does have a lot of old folklore about hauntings and sightings of strange things, and a lot of these tales are almost certainly known to the guards at the time. And there was a famous tale about an old monk who abandoned his faith due to becoming disillusioned with the church and been buried in unconsecrated ground. He was cursed to wander forever. It was a great ghost story, to be sure, but the fact that it had escalated to the point 2 officers were investigating was utterly ridiculous to them. Now, this particular night was warm, and they'd rolled the car windows down to let the air circulate. They sat there and watched, but not expecting anything to happen. After a while, though, they noticed something odd about the bridge in front of them. It looked like something was moving on top of it. Wanting to make sure they weren't just seeing things, Ellis got out of the car and went to investigate. Climbed up a ladder onto the top of the bridge, uncertain as to whether there was actually anything to the guard's story, and was quickly proven wrong. Turned out it was just a loose piece of tarpaulin flapping in the wind. He weighted down to stop it from flapping and went back to the car, and he and Bede had a laugh about becoming spooked by a sheet of plastic. It was then Ellis began to feel, as he later said, like someone walked over his grave. Air around him went cold, and a shiver went down his back. Well, thinking it might be just a wind, he asked Bede to roll up the windows of the car. But even so, the cold feeling got worse. Suddenly, he felt like there was somebody standing right beside him, just outside the car. He turned and jumped in shock to find somebody's torso so close to him he was almost pressed up against the glass of the window. He described it being so close he could clearly see the white V created by the person's clothes over a white undershirt. And as soon as he registered what he saw, that figure vanished and immediately reappeared in the same position, but beside John Beat this time. Beat yelled in shock and tried to get away from it, but the figure had almost immediately vanished again. Well, terrified but wanting to believe it was just somebody playing a prank, Ellis jumped out of the car and wanted to catch whoever it was they had seen, but didn't find anybody. He checked, there were no footprints in the gravel, no sound of somebody running, and with embankments on both sides of them, they were able to see if anybody's trying to escape. Ellis described even getting down on his belly to check under the car, but didn't find anybody. Well, by this time, they were scared, but the two men decided they needed to leave. Ellis got back into the car and tried to start it, but it wouldn't start. He tried again and again, getting more and more panicked every time it failed. And all the while, that cold feeling kept getting worse. After multiple, increasingly panicked attempts, they got the car to start, and they decided to leave the area and go back to the central construction area to recover. Well, they pulled up to the central construction area and immediately tried to radio into the police station, found their radios weren't working. All they were getting was a kind of warbling static. Then there was a loud bang at the back of the car that rocked it as though it had been hit with something. They turned around, didn't see anybody there, but it happened again, like somebody hitting the car with the handle of a pickaxe or a hammer. Well, utterly freaked out by this time, but determined to see what was causing this, Ellis gingerly opened the car door to check around. Then came another bang so powerful it rocked the car on its suspension. Well, having lost any semblance of self-control, Ellis slammed the door shut and tried to start the car again, needing several attempts as the car continued to be rocked before the engine finally came to life. He floored the accelerator and drove out of the construction site, fleeing the area and the attacking malignant presence that lurked there. When they got back to the station, pale and shaking, they told the fellow officers what happened and wrote official reports on the incident that can still be read to this day. In the report, Ellis described the fear. He said it wasn't that which one has when you are about to encounter danger, but worse. It's the kind of thing you have no control over. It's a feeling of dread. Well, to this day, there continues to be reports of ghostly apparitions at the Stockbridge bypass, and nobody's ever been able to explain what the two guards or Ellis and Beat saw those particular nights. Certainly, there's more there than meets the eye. You know, paranormal stories are often easy to dismiss due to, at best, the circumstantial evidence supporting them and usually unreliable witnesses involved. It's all too easy to see the loner who lives way out in the country claiming his house is haunted as just a crazy person with all tall tales, or the hysterical babbling of somebody merely as an overactive imagination with little enough to push to make him or her see what's there. But even policemen and policewomen trained to assess situations analytically and carefully can come across strange, unexplainable situations that scare them beyond anything else their job had thrown at them, made them reassess their view of the world. Well, these incidents are as varied in their apparent causes as they are in their ability to make you look over your shoulder, but all of them were witnessed by some of the most reliable witnesses out there. More than that, these stories are just a cross-section of the many, many paranormal stories and cases told by police over the years. And for every report I've covered, there are hundreds more out there. You have to ask yourself, does it count as evidence that something more than we understand does exist? Maybe it does. After all, there's rarely smoke without fire, and as shown, there's plenty of smoke. One thing that may be comforting, though, is that woven throughout these stories is the desire by the officers involved to protect those who call on their assistance. Even if they're scared silly, the officers still make an effort to do their job, which, of course, is commendable. Now, I've got some other stories that I've been given recently. Quite often, abandoned hospitals are fertile ground for strange things to happen. And this story came from a man by the name of Brandon Rhodes. He started his new job as security guard for an abandoned hospital. And he was still in college, so taking the graveyard shift worked out great with his college class schedules. But he had not anticipated the hospital's mysterious past, which turned what had been Rhodes' idea of an ideal job into a nightmare. Now, the day shift security guard explained the hospital's mysterious history to Rhodes. He said a year before he started working there, the hospital constructed a brand new 5-story building that replaced an older one built in the 1900s. And each floor had rooms lining each hallway with an elevator at one end and stairs at the other. But something strange happened 6 months after the building's completion. Suddenly, all the patients and doctors and nurses left the hospital behind with all their medical tools and supplies. Everything else was left behind, from the half-empty coffee mugs, the wheelchairs, and even uniforms hanging on a rack. Nobody knew why they left the new building in such a rush, and they wouldn't tell. Well, a week later, Rhodes started the graveyard shift, and he enjoyed his job. The building was empty and quiet, and it was an easy job. Also, wasn't a believer in ghosts, and he didn't scare easily. The job called for him to walk down the halls, check the rooms, ensuring no vandalism or unwanted intruders. And he'd start on the first floor and go up to the remaining 4 floors and make his way back, doing a second pass, so to speak, checking each hallway along his way. Well, after the second day of his shift, Rhodes noticed a strange pattern. As he checked each floor, he kept having to close and relock doors he had already closed and locked. Then as he walked down the 4th floor hallway one night, he noticed a light in one of the rooms. He didn't think much about it. He walked down the hallway and turned off the light and continued his patrol. Well, on his second pass that night, that light was back on. Well, he thought this was a little odd and went to inspect the light. Thought maybe it was malfunctioning. And suddenly he heard footsteps and the door opened and closed directly above him, a floor he had just checked. Well, as he went to the 5th floor to investigate the sounds, the elevator on the 5th floor began to move from the floor to floor without him touching any of the controls. And the phone started to ring. Even the nurse call lights would blink uncontrollably. But as crazy as it seemed, Rhodes continued doing the rest of his shift, no other instance ringing it off as an electrical glitch in the building. Well, the next day he did his patrol route, noticed one of the lights was on in the locked hallway rooms, the same room as last time. He knew it didn't make sense for the light to be on because he had checked it yesterday. Nevertheless, he unlocked the door and turned off the lights and relocked it. Then as he began to walk away, he heard the light switch itself on. Well, he peered through the door's frosted glass and saw the light was on again, and unlocked the door and looked around the room. There's nobody there. So he cut the light off, locked the door, and left. Now, this made him a little nervous, but he still decided to brush it off and go back to the hallway during the remainder of the night. On the 4th night of his shift, he changed his route a bit. He was going to start on the 5th floor and ride the elevator down. Well, as he's making his way up to the 5th floor, he hears low laughter and talking. And the higher the elevator went, the louder the voices got. As soon as he arrived at the top floor, all the noise stopped. Suddenly, every light on the 5th floor turned on, including the patients' rooms, and the loud ringing radiated from the phones. Now, he was shocked because he knew absolutely he had heard voices. Well, determined to find out who it was, he checked for an intruder. Didn't find anybody. Then on the 5th night, it began as usual, dead silence. He was on the 4th floor, locking all the doors in the corridor. A dim light beamed when he noticed the room with the frosted glass door was slightly open again. He peered in, and everything seemed normal till he saw a complete outline of a person walk past him out the door. Rhodes said later there was no denying what he had seen. It was clear as day, just a full shadow of a person walking past. Well, his adrenals kicked in, as he said. He started running after the person he thought he saw. And when he went after it, it vanished. That's when he got a WTF feeling, although he enjoyed his time at the hospital. All this unexplained activity scared the crap out of him. Other guards that worked on different days also came back with similar stories. They claimed that most of these same things occurred, except they always saw shadowy nuns walking around the 3rd floor patient rooms. And nobody has a clear explanation as to what is happening in this hospital. To make way for other projects, and partially because of the bizarre stories, the city's destroyed the hospital. But another location that's every bit as haunted as abandoned hospitals are haunted churches. Now, this story also came from a security guard. Man's name was Blake Munoz. Official title was patrol supervisor. Now, he had a lot of routes, and one included a big church that also had private daycare and kindergarten attached to it. And his duties included checking and securing the building from 3 to 4 a.m. Where reports of the building having doors left open were found open the next morning, so the church wanted Munoz to ensure everything was closed and locked up. On his first night, he patrolled the church as assigned. He did say the building had an eerie vibe, and he was a little uneasy, but the building was quiet. All he could hear was his boots as he walked down the long hallway where all the kindergarten classes were located. And he checked and secured all the classrooms. And as he came back toward the exit, he saw a balloon floating down the middle of the hallway. Now, he said he was a bit startled by the balloon's random appearance, but he got the balloon and he deflated it. Next morning, he pulled up to the church the next evening, he pulled up to the church and parked in front of the pastor's office. And the pastor seemed to be working late that night because there was a light on in his office. So Officer Munoz did his rounds. He went to the pastor's office and peeked inside and realized the pastor wasn't there. But a lighthouse-shaped lamp that rested on a table facing a large window was cut on. He cut it off, checked the office, didn't find anybody, locked everything up, and continued his rounds. When he finished for the night and got in his car to get ready to leave, he noticed the light in the pastor's office was on again. Well, he left it alone and went home this time. Next weekend, the church was putting together a bake sale. And as you can imagine, the church's kitchen was full of sweets, including plates of cookies and cakes and brownies. And a staff member left a note informing security they were more than welcome to help themselves to some of the snacks. Officer Munoz made his way to the kitchen to clean everything up, and he distinctly noticed there were 12 chocolate chip cookies sitting on the counter. Well, after he cleaned the rest of the kitchen, he noticed several missing cookies as he went back to the counter to get the cookie plate. Now there are only 3 cookies left, but there was nobody else in the building that could have taken them. Well, he also dealt with the closed and locked doors, mysteriously opening and unlocking themselves without anybody else being around. Other officers had similar unexplained encounters at this church. However, the officer who took Officer Munoz's place one night quit the job the next day. He said, while investigating the chapel, the pipe organ began to play a song, and there was nobody sitting at it. Well, with all the unexplainable events that security is reporting, Munoz asked a staff member about the church's history. And he found out that back in the early 1900s, that building was a small schoolhouse. At one point, the school caught fire and killed several children who were trapped inside. Unfortunately, only after a week of being there, he had requested a church to be removed from his route. You never know what kind of strange things you're going to encounter. Now let's go to our next story. It took place in the 1950s in a small rural area of southern Louisiana. A plane carrying over 200 people mysteriously crashed into the swamplands below. The crash was so violent that the rescue teams couldn't even recover all the bodies. And if anything had been left intact, the swamp gators would have got to them before the crews could. I mean, technology wasn't as advanced then as it is today. And the crash left very little evidence behind. In fact, authorities never even found out what happened on that warm summer night. So friends and families memorialized the area with a statue on the side of the road by the swamp. And with every other violent event, rumors and stories spread claiming ghosts and apparitions haunt the vacant swampland. And after so many years, of course, the only remnant of the crash is that commemorative statue that was put up. Otherwise, the swamp's taken over all the evidence of the plane crash. And ecology had blossomed where before it was once all charred and burnt. A lot of people, especially the older folks, remember that horrific incident, refused to go down there at night. Visitors reported hearing cries and seeing walking apparitions at the scene of the accident, especially on the anniversary of the incident. Al Delgado had moved to Louisiana from California after accepting a position with their police force. Now, he was an extreme skeptic regarding anything paranormal, and it stifled his amusement when he heard stories about the ghosts that walked the swamp. That area was a perfect place to catch speeders and DUIs, especially on the weekend. It was a back road, and people thought they could speed through there without paying any attention. The other officers warned Officer Delgado about the legends, but he laughed it off, figuring they were trying to freak him out so they could snag his spot. Well, Officer Delgado sat in that spot for days, nabbing speeder after speeder that came down that road. Sometimes he'd be so busy he'd stay parked in front of the monument for his entire shift. And a few days later, the chief asked Officer Delgado to knock out the night shift, hoping they could curb the DUI fatality rate on that specific road. Delgado agreed, liking the solace of working overnight. When his shift started, he pulled into his regular spot and set up his radar. The bars weren't closed yet, so the road was quiet, and the sounds of frogs were the only thing moving in the swamp behind him. So he typed on his computer and catched up on paperwork and heard a small thump outside the car. He sat for a moment and listened, but it didn't happen again. So he went back to his work, figuring it was just a gator in the swamp. A few moments later, he heard the sound of scratching moving from the car's passenger side down to the trunk, and then it stopped. Aware of the creatures that lurked around those parts, he grabbed his battalion and weapon and opened the door. Checked under the car before putting his feet down. Walked around the car, shining his light on the ground and around the swamp. Didn't see any sign of anything. He leaned down and looked at the marks on the side of the car and rubbed it with his finger. Seemed to be ash or dust in two long streaks that ran down to the bumper and stopped. At that particular moment, a breeze ran through the swamp, sending chills up his neck. He laughed it off, of course, and went back to his car and continued his work. The next night, he followed that same routine, and about 2 hours after sitting there, he heard the same noise, but this time it was louder. Jumped out of the car and looked around. Didn't see anything but some jumping frogs. Walked around to the side of the car to find even more black soot smeared along the passenger side. Took a deep breath and the smell of fuel and something burning singed his nose. Looked around thinking something might be on fire, but there was no sign of anything anywhere he could see. Thought about the stories people told that they had smelled the planes burning fuel that night, but laughed at himself, even entertaining the idea. Next night, which is his last night on evening patrol, he sat comfortably in his car watching the road for speeders. Then about the same time as the previous nights, began to hear scratching on his car. He jumped out of his vehicle and called out to whoever it might be. Everything was silent, but the smell of burning fuel began wafting through the air. Again, he bent down and inspected the mark on his car. This time, though, it started with a small handprint. He stood up quickly and looked around, hair on the back of his neck standing up straight. Even the frogs were silent by this time, and Delgado could hear what sounded like crying. But the crying grew louder, and as it did, more cries joined in until it sounded almost like a stadium full of people. Looked around, panicking, and froze. From in the swamp, he saw hundreds of glowing orbs that resembled eyes staring back at him. Finally, between the loud crying and the jet fuel and the glowing eyes, he'd had enough and jumped in his car and tore out of there, leaving just dust from his tires behind. Well, to this day, people believe they heard the cries for help from those 200 lost souls who died in that swamp many years ago. And certainly I've heard stranger stories coming out of Louisiana. Well, this story takes place in a college dorm. The dorms are old in that town, dating back to the 60s. And the girls' dorm, especially the lower 3 floors, hadn't been renovated since they were built. The decor was still reminiscent of when Ar and Shag ruled the world. And the college was a central hub of that sleepy little Ohio town and brought almost all the city's revenue throughout the year. And to attract more students to the ever-expanding university, the city decided to take care of the dorms and make them look a little more modern. As the renovating continued, they found that some college students were misusing the area for parties when the resident advisors weren't around, and they actually fell victim to vandalism. As a result, the university decided to hire some security from the pool of police officers in that area that were looking for off-duty extra work. One of those officers was Mitch Bailey, He found a position perfect since he was also finishing up some school, working for the department and looking for more income. Well, he said that shift started dull, except when the bars cleared. But on a typical night when all he did was roam the hallways, there were a lot of interesting relics in the dorms. He learned the engineers initially built the dorms to house the girls' softball team who had won the state championship every year for 10 years. And as the programs for the college expanded and the student number increased, they built more dorms and allowed average students to live there. Well, Bailey played ball his whole life and was part of the police department's rec league every year. One night as he walked the halls, he saw a box full of old trophies and pictures of the team. He looked through the box, remembering his own days playing college-level baseball. There was an old softball at the bottom of the box, so he picked it up and carried it with him while he roamed the floors. Well, he entered the second floor and tripped over a broom that had been left on the floor. The ball fell from his hand and rolled down the hallway, and before he could grab it, it rolled into one of the empty rooms. Well, Bailey laughed at his own clumsiness and paused as the lights flickered slightly. When he looked back down, the ball was sitting at his feet. He picked it up and inspected it carefully. It was the same ball. Then he looked around the hallway and walked into that room. There was nobody there. Thinking somebody was messing with him, he laughed and rolled the ball down the hallway. He watched as the ball bounced along the floor, but suddenly stopped dead as somebody had caught it with their hands. Backed up slightly and squinted, watching the ball rise, and even though he still was skeptical, he didn't believe what he saw. His laughter began to slow as the light started to flicker around him frantically. Heard the doors began to move, and they slammed shut and opened again, creating a loud banging. Looked back at that floating ball that was hanging in the air by this time, and before moving, it shot through the air aimed at his head. He dodged to the right, and the ball hit the wall behind him, made quite a dent. Well, he stepped back slowly as a strong wind whirled through the hallway, blowing dust and old papers into the air. And the feeling of absolute anger filled his chest, followed by fear of what he was experiencing. Suddenly, everything stopped, and the dust dropped to the floor. And from the back, he heard something tapping against the door frame. Shaking hands, he slowly walked back toward that room. No shadow to accompany the noticeable movement inside the room, and he slowly turned toward the open door. And there, hanging from the rafters, was a ghostly apparition of a young girl, still wearing her softball uniform and grasping her mitt with her lifeless hands. He began to back up slowly, stepping on a creaking floorboard. The girl, still hanging from the rafters, angrily turned her head down toward him. He dropped his keys and ran down the stairs and out of the building. Later that night, he researched those dorms, once calm and safe at home. He found just a year before they reassigned the dorms, the coach cut one of their softball players from the team. When she returned to the dorm, she hung herself in the hallway. In addition, a lot of students reported violent hauntings on that housing wing, including slamming doors and broken mirrors and screaming in the middle of the night. Well, he notified the university dean of what had happened, and oddly enough, they didn't seem the least bit surprised. A year later, Bailey discovered instead of putting residents on that floor, they turned it into a lounge area for homework and hanging out. Apparently, there had been too many instances of paranormal-related activities at that place, and for his part, Bailey swore never to return again. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, we'll be talking about stories that are strange and unusual. Until then, Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.